Starting to get folks coming in. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And as you're joining, so I am based in Massachusetts and we are in the midst of a snowstorm. So I will just share that. But as you're joining, if you could share with us where you're located and what your weather is, we'd be curious to hear. Steve and Sharon, you want to share where you are located?
Yeah, sure. We're located just outside of New York City. And the weather here is snowy and cold.
Winter Wonderland.
Yeah.
Winter Wonderland, yes. Definitely going for the white Christmas here. We've got Switzerland joining us. Welcome.
Hi, Andrea.
Excellent. Okay, well, windy and wet in Seattle.
From Edison 365.
Excellent. Welcome, Tad. All right, well, while folks are logging in, I would love to just welcome you all to our Eat, Sleep, Innovate virtual book club series. And this is where we connect with people and stories profiled in the book, and also organizations that have put the tools into practice. So thank you all so much for being here. I will mention the session is being recorded and will be made available on our digital hub. So that's eatsleepinnovate.com. So we'll start with some introductions. My name is Natalie Painchaud. I'm the Director of Learning at Innovate and co-author of the book Eat, Sleep, Innovate, together with Scott Anthony, Andy Parker, and Paul Cobbin. And the book is really all about how to bring creativity and to make it an everyday habit inside your organization. And I'm thrilled to welcome our friends here from the Salvation Army, Steve and Sharon Bussey. They are Territorial Mission Strategists at the Salvation Army Eastern Territory. So welcome.
Great to be with you guys.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, of course. And for reference, the Salvation Army is featured in the book as what we call a NO-DET, a normal organization doing extraordinary things, and is a companion case study in the book titled Creating Innovation Chefs. We'll talk a little bit more about that analogy in just a moment. Let's see here. Great. So we've got 45 minutes today, and we really want to make this a discussion. I have a series of questions I prepared, but we want to hear from you and hear your questions. So you can either type those in the chat or go ahead and use the Q&A function. We'll be monitoring those throughout. And I guess one question we have for the chat, in addition to the weather, is we're curious what brought you here today. You know, what interested you in joining this webinar today? And while we're looking for those responses, I'll start with my first question. So this is a really busy time right now for the Salvation Army, and it looks very different from other years. Most of us, I know myself, connect the Salvation Army with the red kettles and the bells at Christmas time. Could you share a little bit with us just about the background of, you know, who the Salvation Army is and what your mission is?
Sure, I'm happy to do so. So the Salvation Army is actually over 150 years old. It was created in East London in England. Today it's in 132 countries worldwide. What's really unique about the Salvation Army is that it is both a church denomination that comes out of sort of the Methodist type tradition, but along with that, it's a global nonprofit service organization as well. And we use, tapping into that innovation chef analogy, we use analogy of a soft-boiled egg to help to describe the Salvation Army. That like an egg, it has a shell that holds it together, and that's our corporation. And then along with that, there's the egg whites, which have to be properly formed in a soft-boiled egg to form sort of a cup. And that's all the temporal nonprofit service innovations that we have. And then the church is sort of like the yolk, the gravy, that sort of sits in there in that perfectly boiled egg. And each of those, from that motivation that comes from our church base, comes that nonprofit service that works in partnership with other volunteers. And then the organization piece allows us to be able to scale that and to move very quickly with the efficiency of an army to really do the most good that we can for the most people that are in the most need.
Yeah, and I think those three identities are then leveraged to serve our mission. And our mission statement actually says that we are that our organization works to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and meet human need in his name without discrimination. And so in a nutshell, that's really what we seek to do. Motivated by the love of Christ, we want to show that love to others, and that powers the innovation on the front lines to make sure we're meeting those human needs.
Great. No, thank you. And that ties to the next question. And I know, Steve, you're going to make everyone hungry for lunch who's on the East Coast here in the US with the eggs. But, can you speak, in the book, we define innovation as something different that creates value. As a nonprofit, why does innovation matter to the work that you do?
That's a great question. And, to tap into your Insight founder, Clayton Christensen, who talks about jobs to be done, that need is in many ways circumstance based. And as a result of that, if need is circumstance based, it manifests itself in many different ways. And therefore, if we understand what the job is to be done, how we respond to that need requires that we adapt quickly.
And I think, I'm so glad you mentioned that definition, Natalie, because I think doing something that has value is really behind the innovation of the Salvation Army. Our slogan, I think perhaps some people have seen it on those trucks, that are picking up goods. And that slogan is doing the most good. There's actually a little bit that follows that slogan, and it says doing the most good to the most people in the most need. And so when we consider meeting human need, we want to innovate at that point of need. And so we need to understand, first of all, we've got to empathize with the people that we're in contact with. We need to listen to their needs. And then we need to adjust and adapt in order to meet that need in a relevant and a profound way that actually has that value, that creates the value for the person who's receiving that need. And so once we've done that, once we've been able to innovate, understand that need, we then can use that organizational structure to scale that solution so that we're then meeting the need of the most people we possibly can.
Absolutely. And again, that scaling coming from learning from the creativity allows us to learn the lessons, do that with efficiency and effectiveness and speed. And so that's what also helps us to be able to scale that by learning quickly and adapting quickly and scaling quickly.
And I remember it was, I guess, last year when my colleague Annie Garofalo and I came and visited you in New York, and you set up a day for us to hear all of these stories. And there were just so many examples of the job to be done, really listening to understand what those needs are. And then also how you scaled it. And I wonder, Steve or Sharon, if you would share just an example. We have a couple we share in the book. There's the IT one or the coffee one. Any of those, I think would be fun to share with this group.
Yeah, I mean, one of the examples that we share in the book is the story of Captain Mike Harper and Dan Labossiere, who were up in New Hampshire, and the homeless population within that community. Normally, we have emergency disaster type trucks that have coffee urns and things like that in them, and those trucks will drive to a central location, and people will come to those vehicles to get, a warm cup of hot chocolate or a sandwich, a cup of soup, or things like that. But many of those who they were seeking to reach were not able to come to where those trucks were. And they actually discovered a picture from the 1940s, I believe, of a person in the Salvation Army who had a backpack coffee urn that they had taken to the people. And so they got this inspiration. They said, wow, how could we take that idea and do that today? So they go on, search online, and they discover that there are sports stadiums that do something similar. So they purchase one of those, they make that investment to do a small experiment. They put that backpack on, they go out, and they're able to really come to the point of where people are at need and be able to service those who are in the cold, and maybe don't have the ability to get to a warmer place, that we're able to bring that hope to that point of human need. And so after that, being able to share that with others and to be able to allow that idea to catch in other places and to be replicated allows that type of innovation to scale. And so that happens sort of organically, but it's representative of that culture of innovation that you speak of. in the book.
That's such a great segue, which is to get into this analogy, right? Where you said there's a lot of things happening organically. You almost like had this culture of innovation, but you hadn't necessarily called it that, or you hadn't been deliberate about saying these are the behaviors that enable us to do the most good. And that's really where our conversation kind of started. So I wonder, Sharon, if you could share kind of the cooking analogy or the chefs, and how we landed there to explain the situation, that you were kind of in.
Sure, absolutely. I have a great story actually from my history that really places this concept and this analogy into a concrete example. So I'll share that story for you guys a little bit, and hopefully it sparks some thoughts about how you see kind of this implicit innovation happening and how we can move to making it more explicit in our organizations. My great-great-grandmother was a lady who was actually blind, and she created this incredible family recipe called a milk tart.
From South Africa.
That is, yeah, it's a kind of a famous recipe in South Africa. Every family has their own special recipe, but she kind of created this special recipe for our family, but she was blind, and so she wasn't able to measure ingredients. She made this milk tart by feel and by judging the weight using her hands. She then taught this recipe to my grandmother, who was her granddaughter. And so my grandmother, who could see, then learned this recipe by weight, by feeling out the ingredients. When my mom married into the family, my grandmother said, well, I've got to teach you our family recipe. And my mom watched as my grandmother weighed out these ingredients, and she said, oh no, I need measuring cups. So she went to the closet and they worked together to measure out the ingredients and actually turned this kind of recipe by feel into something a little bit more concrete. My mom then transferred that onto us by showing us how to make this milk tart. And I have a terrible memory. So I said, I can't remember that. I'm going to have to write it onto a recipe card. And so that's what I did. I wrote it onto a recipe card. And when I moved from South Africa here to this country, I had to tweak it a little bit. I had to adjust some of the things because not all the ingredients are exactly the same. And so I kind of twisted a little bit and made it unique to our family here. And then as our daughters grew up, I wanted to teach them that recipe so that they could pass it on. And so I turned it into a little video so that they could actually see and watch the process. And now they're living in different parts of the States. And one of the staples that they make for friends and family is our family's South African milk tart. And so the sense of taking something that my great-grandmother just kind of did in kind of a very physical way, turned into something very explicit that can now be passed on. And so that leads to kind of our chef analogy, which Steve can articulate a little bit here.
Yeah, so when the book was in development at the Harvard Idea Labs, there was an opportunity for several of us to discuss, and I was trying to explain what the culture of innovation looks like in the Salvation Army. And when you look at, your extraordinary organizations, your Facebooks and your Googles and, your Pixars and others who have these very clearly defined, almost scientific models of innovation. I said in many ways, those are like, when you go to a French chef and, there's 3 Michelin stars and, there's this almost gastronomic science, which they can calculate the exact temperatures of things. And they have an army of like sort of PhD type people cooking your meal, that are able to deliver this incredible plate. That is a great plate of food, which they're able to deliver. And that is one way to cook a meal. But then if you go into the hills of Italy and you find a grandmother who does what her mother and her grandmother and her great-grandmother did, that learns how to forage the resources, the constraining resources that are around them. And from that foraging is able to produce a plate of food that is able to stand up to that Michelin star restaurant. Which one is a great meal? Well, they're both great meals. The one is a very explicit process. The other is almost tacit or implicit, and it actually is an extension of the culture from which they come from. And we say that in many ways, the Salvation Army is the Italian grandmother of innovation, in which even folks like Peter Drucker recognize the incredible innovation in the Salvation Army, but we might not even be conscious of that innovation. So part of what we're trying to do is to take that implicit tacit knowledge and, like Sharon, take it from just a feel, sort of type of thing, to how do we make that process a little bit more explicit and to help to do it more intentionally.
I love that analogy, and I think a lot of organizations probably are experiencing the same thing. They know they're doing something right, and they're questioning, how do we keep this up, and how do we ensure that it gets passed on to the next generation. But at the same time, one thing I think sometimes they can seem like they don't go together is history and innovation. And we've had a lot of discussions about this. Do you share how you think about the role of history when it comes to creating the new and different and creating value?
Sure. I think the story that Steve just shared with regards to the Mobile Joe and how Mike and Dan were inspired by that picture from history and said, how can we do that today and do it with the resources that we have available today? I think the first role that history plays in innovation is inspiration. So often we think we're inventing something for the first time. And really, if we took a look back at what we've done before, there are some wonderful tools, resources, ideas that exist there that if we reimagine them in a new way, could really have that value, create value for the people that we're trying to connect with. I think the second role that history plays is it gives us permission to try something new. And so often there is, fear of failure can sometimes hold us back from trying something, and because we're afraid we're going to fail, that we're going to look stupid, and that we're not going to succeed. But I think as we look at history and we see great ideas, some of which have worked and done incredibly well, and other ideas that haven't worked, but we've turned that failure into learning, I think that gives us permission and gives us creative courage to try something new. And to see what's going to work in our new context. And then I think the other thing is it keeps us true to our mission as an organization. And I think particularly for nonprofits, knowing our mission, knowing our purpose is really critical, because we don't have tons of money to invest in a whole bunch of ideas. But if we understand our history, that's going to guide us in terms of leveraging our resources, our money, our people, our time in ideas that are really going to be true to our mission, that are going to align with our purpose in the most effective way. And I think those three ways that history can really impact our innovation and actually encourage innovation and push us forward is really powerful. One idea that we've been very inspired by is we found in our history something called the Officer Idea Exchange. And officers in the Salvation Army are pastors, they're leaders in the Salvation Army. And as early as the early 1900s, the Salvation Army had the system where officers or people part of the Salvation Army, soldiers, members of the Salvation Army, could submit ideas, and they would publish these ideas and then would allow for exchange of ideas. And so just seeing that 100 years ago in our history is inspirational. It gives us permission to try something new, and it also keeps us true to our mission and says, how can we be very intentional about keeping to our purpose and strengthening our purpose through the new innovations that we come up with.
Yeah. If I could say as well, some of those great organizations, we were just telling Natalie a little bit ago that Pete Docter just recently spoke about Pixar. And he said right now what they're trying to do is they're trying to toggle that tension between this tradition which Pixar has and innovation. And how do they really understand and celebrate that thing that has defined what Pixar is, but not allow it to make them vulnerable to disruption? So how do you continue to celebrate who you are in terms of your identity and purpose, but continue to disrupt yourself to find new ways to innovate? And it's not that we do either or, it actually should be a both and. And I think one of the potential vulnerabilities that we have as innovators is that we are often very future oriented, and we're also very exploration oriented. And that's a gift to any organization. But along with that, because we're often so focused on the future and the exploration, that we forget that there's actually an entire canon of ideas that are behind us. And so, Vijay Govindarajan, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, speaks about how sometimes we can get caught into a path dependency where we're just so used to what we're doing that our success defines us and actually makes us vulnerable to being disrupted. That path of dependency requires us developing an organizational forgetting, being willing to not be just defined by what we did last, so that we're able to take on some new expression. That's really important that we do. But along with that, what I would suggest is that along with that organizational forgetting, there should be organizational rediscovery as well, that we're able to look back to our past as a means to understand what our essential identity is, that part of the organization that transcends circumstance or transcends space and time, that allows you to be able to say, this is who we are as an organization. And it allows you to then, if you align to that identity and purpose, that allows you then to disrupt yourself and to find new and creative adaptive expressions in the future and in new sort of contexts.
Oh, so many good things that you just shared there. And I think being inspired by the past, and just because you're challenging the ways of working, it doesn't mean you're disconnected from your why, your purpose and why you exist. And we do talk about that it's so dangerous in organizations. I know I've said it, I'm sure many of us had. It's just like, that's just the way things are done here. We get a little complicit. We just sort of, that's just the way things are done. But what I loved about what you shared, Sharon, is the giving permission and this phrase of creative courage. I think that's really important. And then this idea that you spoke about, which is as a nonprofit, you face constraints, but constraints really do enable innovation. As we profile lots of different no-debts in the book, and we've had many of them on this book club, including UNICEF, the UK Joint Forces Command, the Settlement Music School. And these are all organizations in different sectors, locations that are organized in fundamentally different ways. I think it was so interesting, Steve, how you described the centralized, but then the running yoke, right, that goes really around the world with your presence. And so I think in addition to drawing inspiration from history and your past, there's also drawing inspiration from organizations that might look or feel different from your own. And in the book we have kind of 6 lessons from these no-debts, but I'd love to hear just any of your experiences or reflections where you've drawn inspiration outside of your organization.
Oh, I think that's something that we love to do as well. I think truth is that when you define your organization, to use sort of a Simon Sinek analogy, not defined so much by what you do, but why you do what you do, that liberates you, you're not just looking for cookie cutter examples. Because I think benchmarking is helpful, but sometimes what benchmarking causes us to do is to look at something and to sort of say, let me take this generic thing and replicate it within my organization. I think that there's a different way to look at other organizations, where you look at the essence of what that organization is and try to see different pieces that could fit into your organization. So for example, we spend a lot of time looking at the for-profit world. We look at other nonprofits. We look at other churches. We look back in history. In fact, you could pretty much look anywhere and gain inspiration. And so, but the key is that you understand the engineering of your organization. And then because of that, there are different pieces that can allow you to take sort of a mosaic of ideas. And if you understand how your organization works, that that this could be plugged in here, this could be reinvented there. And as opposed to just cookie cutting, if you pull from many different ideas and you allow that to become relevant to your particular objective, then that will allow for something that is still true to who you are, as Sharon was saying, but along with that is going to be able to draw inspiration from other organizations. So we reach far and
pretty much
gain inspiration from many places.
Yeah.
I know you're one of the most well-read people. If we were in your office, we'd see that bookshelf behind you. But I'm just going to check in. We don't really have any questions, more commentary, which is great. Just appreciation for the stories, and lots of good comments in here. I did want to actually, while we're talking about inspiration, just curious what you're reading right now. Where are you drawing your current inspiration from?
Well, one thing which I do want to, I see that TAD is there, and one exciting piece that we're doing, going back to the Italian grandmother analogy, part of what we're trying to do in the mission strategy and innovation world, part of the Salvation Army, is trying to develop sort of those recipe cards, to be, like you're doing with the beans of what are the behavior enablers, artifacts, and nudges that we can have, and how do we make those more explicit? We're asking ourselves, how can we make the entire process of innovation that is implicit and more explicit? And we're actually partnering with Edison 365, which is TAD's company, to design an infrastructure of strategy and innovation that is going to allow us to capture sort of those ideas. Rita McGrath talks about how snow melts at the edges. Well, we have to listen to our front lines to see both threats and opportunities, and then to connect that to the central sort of command unit, and then out to the rest of the organization. And their tool is really helping us to be able to do that. But the key as well is not just connecting one another, but actually making sure that our innovation and our strategy actually connects with execution, so that we can actually measure the type of impact and benefit that we are committed to delivering. So with that as well, I want to share this book by a great fellow named Jack Dugall, called The DNA of Strategy Execution. And what we love about his book is that he's tapping into many of the sort of great perspectives, like what Insight presents, what you, Scott, writing, what Clayton Christensen has written, and other great strategists and others, and connecting that to the world of project management, an area which innovators tend to not tread into, but which is actually critical for an innovation to not just be a good idea, but for it to actually be realized. And so blending this type of reading with sort of the system that we're working on with Edison 365 has been really, really helpful.
And I was going to add to that to say that I think the benefit that we're seeing right now with Edison 365 is the ability to measure that value. And in a nonprofit, that can be challenging to do, because how do you measure somebody growing in confidence, or being better educated, or being helped with the physical needs that they have, and their system is going to help us to do that. So that's very exciting, because we want to be able to measure whether or not the innovations that we're coming up with is really adding and creating that value and having the impact that we want to have, because that's going to help us to remain mission true, to say these things are benefiting us and these things are not. So let's focus our energies towards the things that are really creating the greatest impact, and so that we can do the most good, right? And help the most people in the most need.
No, I mean, this is relevant to every organization, that we work with. Just appreciate. And I do think, Steve, to your point, project management execution, not necessarily always a strength of the innovators, and sometimes is seen as much like history, right? Like it's the opposite of this, but it truly is an and if you're going to have an impact and create value.
And Natalie, it's white space for innovators as well.
Right.
I mean, that needs to be as much innovated as the exploration and future forecasting processes. And so if we're able to draw upon both those, we actually have a 360 lens from which to sort of 360 or 365?
360.
Yeah, say no, 65 days. Man, I can't think about years in space, but I can.
Math is not a strong suit.
Don't ask me to do math. You can talk all day about innovation, but not math. That's hilarious.
That's great. Yeah, we see, so lots of just great comments here. Thank you, Ron. Yes, Steve and Sharon also blow me away with their insights. Every organization needs chefs, right? And they need the courage to cook. I really like the way you described that, Ron. So we'd love to hear, what are the next great ideas you're working on, today? Where are you spending your time right now?
A lot of what we're spending our time on right now is we're working with our territorial leaders on crafting a vision that is really, during this time of, it seems as though there's just so much conflict in our world right now, and everyone seems to be polarized as well. And so part of what we're looking at is what are strategies in which, that we can create a sense of unity, but along with that, that celebrates diversity. And how can we not only allow that to be reflected truly in our organization, that tension of unity and diversity, but in the communities in which we serve? How are we able to sort of celebrate that type of thing? So that's a piece which we're working on right now. And we have the privilege of being able to sort of look at the entire organization in our new role as territorial mission strategists and seeing within our territory,
Right.
and to see how all of those pieces, all those different departments and geographic divisions can be working together with sort of one purpose, but along with that, while defining that essential purpose, to empower and unleash creativity, to truly be able to do the most good to the most people with the most need.
Well, and you've shared too just some of the innovations in this pandemic. I think things around even like food delivery. Any anecdotes there that you can share?
Sure, yeah, I can share. There's some wonderful things happening all around our territory, and the amount of innovation that is taking place on a local level. I think of one local Salvation Army right now, not too far from us, a couple hours drive from us, who turned their Christmas distribution into a Christmas train. Because people couldn't get out of their cars, and so they created almost the kind of feel of a Christmas railway. And so the cars go through and stop at different stations and receive different gifts and items at different places. Hot chocolate, candy canes, and an opportunity for Santa to pose next to the car for a family photograph. They're serving over 500 families a day. And last night, I just actually saw some photographs in the midst of the snowstorm that is hitting the eastern seaboard. Them and their volunteers were outside for 8 hours straight, just serving people without discrimination, right? Anybody who needed that help came through that railway line and were able to be blessed with these gifts and an opportunity to celebrate Christmas. That's what it's all about, right? Those are the stories that make a difference. And that's just one location, and there are hundreds just throughout the USA Eastern Territory where people are serving without a break, without a vacation, for months on end now in the midst of COVID, and then even scaling their efforts, serving, I think it was 400% increase over Christmas time. So giving more than we've ever given before. And that's so inspirational and just such a blessing to us to be a part of this movement.
Oh, thank you for sharing. So I'm going to change topics slightly. So, in the virtual book club, we've had the opportunity to also interview Ed Catmull from Pixar, which was, a big honor and exciting for all of us. And I know you both joined. So I'd love to know, what's your favorite Pixar movie?
Oh, that was so hard. It's so hard to pick that because really we're big Disney and Pixar fans.
Yeah.
But I would say probably Up. It's what I would call a 5-cry movie. When you cry at least 5 times in the midst of it, because it's just so beautiful and moving and touches you on a deeper level, right? And I would say Up is probably my favorite. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, I was going to say Inside Out as well. I mean, I think that process of, it's in many ways discovering, I see it as discovering the creativity that lives within each one of us, and finding ways to make sense of what that is emotionally, intellectually, and sort of the uniqueness of who it is that we are, and giving ourselves permission to be that as well. So yeah, we call Sir Ed Catmull,
I will say Inside Out was a very, very good one. So one of the questions came in from Ron here around digital transformation, becoming a rallying cry, and just how is this affecting you? How are you navigating this?
I'm sorry, say that.
Digital transformation, as you think about digital transformation?
I see. Yes, absolutely. So one of the big issues, interestingly enough, when we talk about like Industry 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution that's coming up, that Wired magazine just a couple of years ago actually talked about, with advances in AI technology, robotics, IoT technology, things like this, that many of the jobs of those who come from our lowest income type jobs that people are working on, they are predicting that over the next 10 years or so, that by 2030, many of those jobs could actually be replaced by AI, by robotics and things of that nature. And what Wired magazine was saying is that particularly in the Northeast of the United States, where many of those jobs are being performed in factories and in restaurants and things of that nature, that there could be a new groundswell of poverty. And I think that's been exasperated by COVID as well. That there's, it's so interesting. Crisis, the word in Chinese, actually means both danger and opportunity. And I think the digital sort of revolution that is taking place in the midst of COVID in the workplace presents an amazing opportunity for us. And it's something that we need to tap into as well to understand. But along with that, it creates an inevitable threat. The Salvation Army was actually born in 1865 in the midst of the Industrial Revolution in the East End of London, where in many ways the advantages of British industrialism and innovation in the 19th century had produced an unintended consequence. There's an unintended consequence that is on the horizon, and it provides a strategic inflection point. It presents an opportunity for us to reimagine how we're doing things, how we're able to tap into digital, to acknowledge the threat that could come from those digital advancements, but along with that, to leverage that same technology to be able to continue to innovate at the point of human need. So that's something which we're beginning to think about as well, and sort of saying, what does that mean for us as an organization? How do we begin to not only continue to do, using the Scott Anthony dual transformation model, not only, tapping into the core things that we're doing today, but how are we thinking about tomorrow and beginning to prepare ourselves, the competencies, the skills, the abilities that are going to be necessary to be ready to respond to that need that is on the horizon.
I think also sometimes we see technology, new technological advances as innovation in and of itself. And I think the challenge to us as innovators is, how do we not become complacent with that technology, but perhaps use it in a different way than what it was intended, stretch it beyond the boundaries of what we're comfortable with, even ourselves, and to really leverage it to meet that human need. Just where we're at. So I think the big challenge is no complacency, right? And to see beyond even the great opportunities to even greater ones.
I think those are really, really great, important points. Maybe just one last question. And I think this is relevant for every organization, right? Which is, how are you keeping volunteers and staff motivated, given just the increased stresses with COVID-19, and just, as you said, they're working harder than ever before. Can you speak to kind of that experience, the volunteer and employee experience?
Absolutely. And just to say, it's hard right now. If you see a person like at a kettle or a person at one of those Salvation Army, give them a virtual hug or so, because our guys are going above and beyond, day in, day out. In many ways have been going for months without a break. During the Great Depression, we had a 700% increase in services. We have been hitting at like 800% plus during COVID. And along with that, it's, when there's been a natural disaster or something like that, you can zone in even for like a year or something like that. But this is sort of a crisis that really doesn't have an end. And along with that, it's not just in one location where you can bring other resources. It's everywhere. As a result of that, the sort of the fatigue can set in. And so there's some things which the Salvation Army is doing internally to help to sort of to relieve, and stuff like that. But But what we do need is we do need increased help. We do need more volunteers. That the Rescue Christmas campaign right now is actually incredibly critical right now, because again, with those services increasing at that level, we never before have we together needed to come together to really help out our fellow fellow man and woman. And so while we do our part, I think it's collectively together we need to do our part to help to continue to be resilient in the midst of this incredible. This is in many ways is a war that we're fighting, and so yeah, we need an army to be able to battle this despair.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. So as we kind of wind down, just curious advice you have for other organizations, and if there's any insights that our participants have taken away from today, you can share them in the chat. We'd love to hear those. But any advice you have?
I think I would say get to know your why. Tether your innovation to the reason and the purpose that you exist, and make sure that it is being leveraged to enhance that. So make sure that you're rooted in that why, and that's going to give you kind of permission to extend beyond yourself. And just going back to that last question, that why is what motivates so many people to keep getting up, to keep working those long hours in the snow and in the cold and in the rain, and to keep serving. And so when you know that why, while you're still human and you still get exhausted, right, it is an incredible motivating factor. And so know your why, not just to free up innovation, but to keep you and your volunteers and your staff motivated and getting up every morning to fight another day. So that would be my advice.
I would say as well, going back to the no-debt idea, when you guys articulated that in Eat, Sleep, Innovate, push the button.
Glad to see it there. Yeah.
That's right. There we go. Shameless promotion, right? No, I'm kidding. What it is that so often we go and we drink from the same source for our ideas, and inevitably, it's sort of like, for lack of a better word, the hipster who thinks that they're going to be different, and so they dress up like everybody else, and rather than being different, you actually become very generic. I think what NO-DETS is teaching us is that there are many places, many untapped locations of inspiration for innovation. And I would challenge you to find your own Italian grandmother, you know what I mean? And it might be in your own organization, it might be in a space which you never thought to look before, but discover those hidden gems that are going to allow you to truly be different as an organization. Don't just look in the for-profit world, look in the nonprofit world, look at other types of organizations, look at churches, look at other faith-served communities, and look at just individuals, who are doing stuff, and diversify, the places where you're getting your ideas of innovation. Because guess what? We have all been created with an innate ability to be creative, to be innovative. And so inevitably, every person you come in contact with has something to teach you. And if you can tap into that and discover that, you will be better personally, socially, and corporately.
Well said. Just use that growth mindset. I had jotted down 3 of my insights in this conversation. They're a bit repetitive, but the first one is to be inspired by history, your own history, and really get to know your why. The second one is look outside, and really look outside, like look different, find organizations that are structured differently, that in a different location somewhere else in the world, a different size from your own. And then the third thing I took away is just the importance of execution, right? So you're not going to have impact if it's only staying with this small group. So being very thoughtful about how to expand to the rest of the organization, so that everybody can benefit from these ideas. And what a perfect way to end, which is what you said, Steve, around like every one of us has the ability to be creative and to innovate. Looks like you've got another.
Can I just add one more to that? one thing which we live by is don't take yourself seriously.
Yeah.
There you go.
Seriously, but don't take yourself seriously. You know, in other words, have fun with it. Recognize humility is key to being audacious, you know, and to recognize that you will make mistakes, that you don't have it all, you know, and as a result of that, allow that to liberate you, you know, to have that childlike spirit of wonder that's willing and open to learn from wherever you go.
Yeah.
Have fun. There's not much more to be said. Just thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Steve and Sharon. It's always a pleasure. All right.
Thank you, Natalie.
Everyone take care. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.